Today on the breakdown, unbridled aggression. What does it get for you? What does it do for you, huh? How much does it help you? We're going to examine that very, very deeply because at the WPT Cyprus main event here in 2024, there is some serious goings on with 5 players left. Over $1 million for first and about $250,000 locked up already for these players, where the chip leader is going to try and put one over on Oliver Weis, crusher, known big-time dude, Oliver Weis. You've heard of him. You love him. You have maybe a trading card? An Oliver Weis trading card? It's possible. Admit it's possible. It's in some... like the Berenstein versus the Berenstern Bears kind of a thing. It's like, oh, Oliver Weis, trading cards. It's the same idea. On the breakdown with Grant Dennison and Jonathan Levy.
A lot of you might be wondering, didn't I listen to this podcast already? No.
Yeah.
This is the same two guys, actually. Weis and Tsouloftas, who are going to be playing a hand pretty close after the hand that we did last week. If you're a frequent listener and you listen every week, last week we did a pretty cool hand where Weis, as the chip leader, attempted to bluff Tsouloftas, and it really didn't work. And we thought Tsouloftas made a good call. We didn't think it was like a good in practice, bad in theory call. We thought it was a good in theory call also. And now Tsouloftas has the chip lead, so that's nice. I can see Jonathan on the screen, and I can tell he doesn't remember the hand at all. I can just tell you right now.
I remember the hand.
Okay.
I mean, I don't remember what anybody had, but I remember the hand. What is
You don't remember what anybody had? Do you remember anything about the hand? Name one thing about the hand. Don't look at this. Don't look at the notes.
No. Oliver Weis moved him in on the river, and Tsouloftas called with not a lot. He didn't have.
I can't believe it.
He had
I can believe it, but I can't believe it.
What? Yeah. What were the hands? Remind me.
I am not looking at the notes, and I will tell you that Weis had Queen Jack of clubs. Tsouloftas had aces with the ace of spades. It was a nightmare run out with Weis donking the flop with the backdoor club draw, but nothing else really with two spades on the flop.
4 to a straight came on the turn, the 7 of spades came on the turn.
Yeah, with the spade, and then the board paired on the river, which would have had the quad sixes.
The 6 paired on the river. Okay, see, I just needed a little help, a little crush.
Yeah, so I was right when I was reading your face when I was talking about the hand.
Yeah, you're completely correct. I just don't like admitting it when you're right. Or any other time.
Yeah, I know.
Or any other time.
I know. Anyway, the same guys are here, but the situation is flipped, except the difference is that Anton Wig, who was a 1 blind stack last time, has since busted. So there were 6 remaining. And there was a 1 blind stack, which was a major ICM factor, which made the last hand particularly high leverage. Right. At this point, Tsouloftas is now the chip leader with $14.5 million, and Weis is second in chips still, but he's got $8.16 million. So Tsouloftas is the major favorite to win the tournament if he just can keep it up,
I mean, sure. Major favorite? I don't know. Whatever.
I don't know.
He's probably the favorite.
Yeah, he's the favorite, but it's not a huge thing. So unbridled aggression. That Weis tried it. Now we're gonna maybe flip roles, see if it works for somebody else, because it didn't work for Weis.
No, it does. Well, it didn't work that one hand for Weis. I think overall it's probably working pretty great for him.
You know who does think unbridled aggression works? The railroad barons of the 1800s. Those guys were ruthless, and they got a lot of money out of that. So
yeah, they were donking flops and turns.
They were certainly.
How can you do that on that card? You're still coming at me. I don't understand. You should definitely be checking. I mean, they were like, I move in, I'm all in again. And that's how they talked and looked. For those
that is exactly how they talked and looked. Andrew Carnegie did not care about range advantage. That's for sure.
No,
it's a guarantee.
No, he cared about train.
I don't even know if he was in the railroads or not. Probably. No, they were all in the railroads, right?
He was an oil man or something, right? I don't know.
Carnegie, oil, railroads.
Is that what everyone
who did the railroads?
Carnegie Oil.
Was it Daniel Plainview? Daniel Plainview? I don't know.
What did Rockefeller do? Was it just banking? They're all bankers in the end, aren't they?
I think they were probably all just poly business, everything I think there were very few regulations, and once they had enough money, they could just buy up everything, and that's what they did. I think that's generally what happened. Anyway, that's the idea at the final table of this poker tournament. Try to buy up all the chips by bluffing. That's how you do it. So
sure.
Let's get into it. This was suggested by Zach M on Discord. If you have a suggestion, Discord's a good place to do it. There's going to be a link in the description of the podcast or the YouTube or whatever you're viewing this or listening to this on. Join our Discord, make suggestions there. You can suggest on Twitter. We are at 2 Poker Guys on X. Sorry, Elon, my bad. Please don't sue me or whatever you do these days. And you can suggest there as well. You can either DM us or do it directly at us. I don't think there's anywhere else to suggest. I mean, who cares? Just use one of those two. You can use the internet. Suggest hands. We like it. All right, so same 2 guys. Let's see if it goes the same way. 120K big blind with 5 remaining. The payouts are first is over $1 million. Currently, we're at 271K. The next money jump is about a 80K money jump. So we're into the serious money. Weis has 8.16 million, is second in chips. There is a 10 blind stack, right, Jonathan? You said that?
The small blind is 10 big blinds currently.
So there's a slight ICM factor, but
a little bit.
It's not an ideal for Weis now that Tsouloftas is on his direct left as the chip leader while Weis is second in chips. This is a dynamic we've seen play out in like the World Series main event a lot of times where the medium stacks just get bullied by the big stacks sometimes.
Absolutely.
It's a good strategy in ICM spots. So Weis has 8.16 million. So he's sitting pretty good with 8.16 million. He's doing pretty well, 70-ish big blinds. Has 9s, 9 of diamonds, 9 of clubs, opens to 250K from under the gun / the hijack because there's 5 remaining, and the EPT, which by the way, you called it the WPT, which was wrong and offensive. The EPT really needs to get this right, and so does everybody else. They should go from the button instead of from under the gun when labeling the positions, because it says Weis is under the gun, and if you just look at that, it has a certain vibe to it, right? If you say somebody's under the gun, it has like the idea that, this is going to be their tight range, but really he's more the hijack than he is under the gun. It's more about how many players are remaining than where you are from the big blind.
What's weird is this: if you're 3 players left, they don't call the person on the button under the gun. They call them the button.
That's
so
right.
It isn't like they don't agree with that. They actually do agree with that, but they haven't made the full shift into continuing that outward to then that means the guy before that would be the cutoff, and the guy before that would clearly be the hijack. And and those are much more descriptive and much more gives us a sense of what that means when they open, right? Versus a true under the gun, as you're saying, if we're 8-handed like they often are at the EPT, an 8-handed under the gun open is going to be much tighter, and in most cases anyway, than a 5-handed under the gun open, of course.
I mean, and it's much more instructive, right? As far as if people are actually watching and trying to figure out stuff about poker, trying to learn poker, it matters how many players are left to act, not how many total are at the table. A pretty common question from newer players on the poker subreddit is how do you adjust to a 6 max game from a 9 max game? It's just pretend there's 3 less players. That's what open your range that you would have opened from those positions anyway. You don't have to change really anything else. It's basically the same.
So the World Poker Tour, I think, for many years did such a service to professional poker players because people would see that folks would be opening ace-4 off, in quote early position, but the World Poker Table final table only have 6 players, right?
Yeah.
So if someone was getting a little out of line, maybe they're opening ace-4 off in the hijack or something like that, but they're not opening at +1, right? But people would see that, and I think they would just get in their head that it's an early position open with ace-4 off, so people would just, if someone saw an ace, the blinds were often big enough, they could raise, and it was a good play, But that's not the case if you're 8 or 9-handed and you're in early position, and most of the time anyway, And I think it really ruined a lot of players for many, many, many years, but really helped a lot of players too, like me.
Well, I mean, if you can just use a little critical thinking, it can help you for sure. So
right. That's
the idea. Yeah. Anyway, Weis is in the hijack. He opens 9s. He would have opened 9s under the gun anyway, but for the purposes of clarity, he is in the hijack. Tsouloftas is next to act. He's got the chip lead with 14.4 million over Weis's 8 million. He has ace deuce off, and this is just a chip leader bully play. The I have an ace 3-bet to 850K. Yep. It's a little awkward if the small blind puts 10 blinds in. Tsouloftas has to call it off, but I guess that's fine. Whatever. Risk 10 blinds there. It's not like Weis is going to be like, oh my God, you 3-bet me without a premium hand. Like, it's not like revealing any sort of information, I don't think.
I mean, so Weis is going to get that information in 30 minutes anyway, right? It doesn't really matter. It's not about that.
So I want to ask strategically how you feel about this. If you're Tsouloftas, who I think is a pretty competent player, but he's not Oliver Weis, who is a crusher and a known crusher, and I'm sure Tsouloftas knows that at this point. There is the obvious default strategy at the final table where you have the chip lead, second in chips, who has significantly fewer chips than you, is directly on your right. There's shorter stacks. You should step on that person. You should make their life a living hell. Should you do that even if they are twice as good as you at poker and have enough blinds to maneuver? Is it still a good idea to take hands like ace deuce off that are going to be incredibly hard to play post flop against a guy who's better than you? Should you still do it?
I think it's a great question. I think I have a bifurcated answer for you. So the general answer is probably you shouldn't. Probably you should pick on other stacks that are, good to pick on and stay out of that guy's way a little bit more of the time if he's so much better than you. I remember learning this lesson in the World Series of Poker, one of the first few years I was playing, when I just sort of found it hard not to take on the clear best player at the table, the known guy or whatever, the clear pro, whatever. And I would just be like, oh, well, so he's going to have more bluffs, he's going to have more this, so I could probably get away with more stuff. But the truth is they're going to make better decisions than everyone else, including me. So why would I try and put a lot of chips in the pot against that guy unless I have a really good reason to, right? And the reason just being I should do it or he's wide is usually not good enough. So that's the big answer, and I think that's mostly the answer, in my opinion. I'd be curious to know if you agree with that. But let me give my second half, and then you respond to all of it. I think the exception is if it feels like Ollie Weiss is not respecting that we have a huge chip lead and are in his immediate left and is opening as if he is the chip lead. So he's opening a lot of hands. Then I think we should tax him a little bit for this. We don't have to go crazy, but we should 3-bet him a little bit more than we otherwise would. So that way it isn't so obvious that he feels like I can play back to this guy. I'm Oliver Weiss. I don't care. I don't want him to get into that mode, but I do want him to think oh, this guy is pushing back. I want him to be in that general mid zone of maybe I shouldn't open some of these lighter hands because I get 3-bet a little too much and I don't like it. And I'm not sure if it's the guy's running slightly hot or if he's just pushing back. I'm unclear. I want him in that zone a little bit just to slow him down a little bit. That's my thought. So what's your take on all that?
That's a good thought. I asked the question because I think it's something that I haven't truly solved in my mind. It's not a spot that I'm in that often because the tournaments that I play that I make the final table, sometimes I'm usually the best player at the table or at least tied for the best player at the table. So
okay, but you were in a World Series event with 17 players left and you were the chip leader in the event, right? And there were no players at your table and you've had some experiences of this anyway.
Yes, but I haven't had enough experience with it to game it out.
Okay, fair enough.
It's like a discrete situation. So, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think a lot of it has to do with effective stack depth. Weiss is deep enough that I might want to avoid him because he might just feel like I'm going to take a few shots and play well as I possibly can, and I'm not going to buckle to ICM pressure when I have 70 bigs here. I can maneuver 70 bigs better than anybody at this table. Why would I let the chip leader push me around? Right. Mm-hmm. Whereas if he had 35 bigs and was second in chips, I think it's a lot easier to push him around. If Weiss has 35 and Tsouloftas has 75, then I think you can really threaten the stack a lot more with a pre-flop 3-bet. And there's not as much that the superior player can do about it, right? Things become a little bit more linear and it's a lot more difficult for them to make your life hell. So I think if I'm going to not step on the player in this perfect scenario to step on the player, it's when the stacks are like this, where Weiss has 70 bigs, even though he's the perfect type of stack for me to attack. It's still a stack that is too maneuverable for me to really outplay him just because I have more chips than him. So I don't know. I don't know if this is right, but I think stacked, I don't know where the line is where you delineate there's now few enough chips that I can do it. But I think that's an important factor. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great point for sure. 35 bigs is an interesting one because 35 bigs basically sets up he's generally going to be 4-betting or folding as opposed to calling your 3-bets almost ever, right? It's going to be hard for him to call a 3-bet out of position and continue to play if he's put in 25% of his stack almost, or 22% of his stack. He's not going to love doing that he's not going to do that very many times, right?
If Weis has nines is kind of the exact hand that he might call with, though. Like if he opens to off of 35 bigs to 2 bigs and we 3-bet to 7 bigs, he's probably going to call nines.
Oh, I agree. But most of his range he probably isn't calling, is what I'm saying. He's got king jack off. He can't call that, right? He's going to have to 4-bet or fold that. If he has king jack suited, he could call it, but it's not going to feel great. Like, it's not like he's going to know where he is at almost any flop. Even when he hits a pair, he's really not, he's going to need to flop really well to feel great about his hand at any point. With nines, it's going to be clearer most of the time, right? Of like, well, if I hit a set, obviously I'm golden. And if I flop it as an overpair, I know I'm hanging around for a while, for sure, right? And then, but if it comes 10 high, sure, I'll hang around for a while. But it's going to be, the decisions are more obvious than if we have king jack and we flop a jack and he goes bet, and it's like, I don't know. Am I just going to hold on here no matter what? What's the plan? And it just feels harder. And so he might just avoid some of that. And so I just think he's folding out a bunch of stuff when he's more at that 35-ish blind level, it's just going to work more right away. Not that it's bad if he calls anyway, because if he calls, we're going to win a lot post flop, and we probably make more chips that way. But just even reining him in is a powerful thing to do. If we can successfully do that. But at 70 blinds, like you're saying, it's hard to rein him in because he can also raise, fold a bunch of times and still have 62 blinds and like whatever, I can keep going. Like it doesn't really change anything. So we can't exert the same kind of influence and pressure at this 70 blind stack level that he has when he's good, specifically.
Right. And with a player like Weis, whose chops were online, so he's like used to many iterations of hands over and over and over again. He's not going to be like some of the live players you'll see at a final table. Like, oh, the guy 3-bet me a couple times. I can't open anymore. I got to change my range. Weis is going to be like, my range is my range. I have 70 blinds. I'm going to open this range. It's fine. So yeah, I still think there is some effectiveness to it at this stack depth. There is still the threat of like, do you really want to get into a really big one right now with the guy who has you covered? There is that threat. I just think it's less of a good idea than usual when you're doing it against like the guy who's clearly the best player at the table and has a lot of stack.
And just to put a little button on this, I think I agree with you. First of all, he's not going to change his range. He's not going to open less, but he might 4-bet more. Yeah. Right? If he sees you 3-betting out, which is not what you want. That's exactly the worst scenario for you. If he's going to, if you're 3-betting him light a lot, right? Now he's going to still open the same amount, but steal back. Like that's horrible. You don't want him doing that. So yeah, this is because he's good and he's tough and he's got enough money. He probably doesn't really care. He probably cares, but not so much the way some of these other players might, right?
I mean, if he's really truly a pro, it doesn't really matter how much money he has in general. It's like he has his bankroll and he's rolled for this tournament and he's going to play it correctly, right? Is probably a better way to put it.
In theory, sure, but in reality, it's often not the case, right? Within these spots, right? Like, I'm just thinking back to even Daniel Coleman when he's talking about Scott Seaver, that one hand when Coleman had aces that he folded in the cash game. He's like, Seaver's never balanced there. Seaver always has it 1,000,000%. He's never going to put in $90,000 on the river with that, and like Seaver's one of the best players in the world and had lots of money, but still, like, they're still human beings too. And
okay,
so I think
fair, but
does
like,
matter.
But in a 5,300 euro event, you should probably like, even if it by classical bankroll management standards is considered a shot take, it's probably not like a hurtful shot take to lose the 5,300, right? It's like, oh, I lost like 1% too much of my bankroll.
But we're not talking about that in this case, right? Now we're talking about the ability to win because you're only a few places away from another $800,000. That's the money part we're talking about.
Yeah.
For Oliver Weis caring less about than other people is what I'm talking about. Not the losing the 5,300. I agree with you. Most people know when they enter a tournament they're going to lose that a big chunk of the time and are not going to sweat it too much, right? They sweat it some, but not too much in most cases. But when you get, and you see this, even at smaller final tables of much smaller events, people absolutely sweat the money jumps and absolutely sweat, there's 7 players left. They're going to make a big, huge fold because they're not really in the big part of the money is still, it's still like a few places away. And I'm saying Oliver Weis is going to be much more immune to that kind of feelings than even players, I think, at this final table.
Yeah. And I think it's based on probably not only his bankroll, but also just his his experience and his understanding of like, I'm just going to make the best play at every point, and that will generate the most money for me over time. And that is how I will do it. Yeah.
I do what I do. This is my strategy. It works really well. I don't know if it's going to work this time, but overall, this is what I do. It works great.
Yep.
I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah. Anyway, here we are. Tsouloftas does 3-bet the ace deuce off to round it back to reality here to 850K. I'm wondering if he should exploitatively go bigger than theoretically normal, just to like really be like, hey man, do you really want to do this? Like, should he make it 1.2 million instead of 250K in this exact spot where Weis is this deep?
I don't think so. I think
kind of taking a little bit of cash game theory in here. Cause like, when you're super deep in cash games, which I have been a lot recently, you can justify some really pretty sizable 3-bets even in position just because of the depth of the stack, So, I mean, if you feel like 850 is going to work a lot less than 1.2 when you have a hand like ace deuce off, should you just make it 1.2 when the guy has 70 bigs?
I mean, we have to make this play with the belief that when called, we are still a favorite to win the pot, right? Like that we're going to put enough pressure on him in position with the initiative that we're going to favor to win the pot.
Our initial goal is to get him to fold preflop, though, right? Because ace deuce off's only real value is that it has an ace as a blocker preflop.
Yeah. You're right about that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, 1.2 is going to get through more of the time, but as soon as he starts seeing that we've just sized up that way against him, he can also 4-bet just a little bit. And it's really incredible, right? Suddenly it like, it just makes we're just risking so much more for the same reward.
I'm just wondering if there's literally a higher expected value to making it 1.2 million.
Right, that's the question. I'm wondering too. I feel like we're risking so much more. Maybe there's an in-between amount here. Like if we make it 950 instead of 850, is that going to change anything? Probably not.
Probably not.
1.2 probably does. I mean, you're right about. I have to believe another 2.5 blinds.
I'm not necessarily
case,
convinced
but
of this idea. Yeah, against nines, it's not going to work. I'm not necessarily convinced of this idea, but I think it's something that I consistently wonder about. Like in poker, ever since I've become serious about poker, within most of the circles of the good poker players, whatever level of poker player you are, talking to players on break stuff, sizing is something that's generally agreed upon. Pre-flop sizing in particular, where it kind of changes over time with whatever the metagame is. But like everybody's like, oh, the good players make it this size. But I think sometimes there's room to change it in particular scenarios. And I think that people don't think about that enough. I think it's more worth thinking about than people give credit to instead of just autopiloting your sizing at all times.
It's just a question of the risk versus the reward, right? That's the piece with making it 1.2 where we just have to be, this really has to get through pre-flop significantly more of the time. And then the question is just how much does it that 850 won't get through, right? That what's the difference there? Is it worth it? And my inner bones tell me it's not. Tell me it's like that we don't get enough more folds with the amount of extra risk we're taking on. But I don't know the answer, of course.
I mean, what does Weis do with, to use a hand that you were talking about earlier, with his 70 blinds and king jack suited? Yeah. If you make it 1.2, that might just be a fold instead of a call now.
I mean, I think it is the first time or two. But if we're always making it 1.2 and we're picking on him, at some point that's probably a 4-bet because it's got reasonable blockers, way better blockers than nines, right?
We're not always going to make it 1.2 and we're not always going to 3-bet. I think it's okay to be unbalanced here a little bit because we're not going to have enough iterations of this situation to make it that Weis can figure it out, whatever the pattern is that we're doing.
I mean, if they're streaming this, though, and he can find out 30 minutes later what our hands were, and if we're sizing differently as 3-bets pre-flop, unless we're changing, like, on the fly every time, and that means it's more randomized anyway then, and it's not really customized I need a fold here, so I'm going to size up or whatever it is, then I don't know. I feel like he's going to catch up pretty quickly to what we're doing.
I mean,
I assume he's got people who are watching all this and immediately relaying him all this stuff, especially if shit like this is going on. Like, I mean, these are
reasonable points, and I once again have put myself in the spot of arguing for the unconventional thing, which I don't necessarily believe is right, but I think it's worth considering. Is all I'm saying. And I sometimes use unconventional sizing, and there are times when I've used it when nobody knows who I am. Like I'm not at a place where, and some of the good players then think I'm bad for a little while.
Sure.
And that's pretty cool. Like that ends up being pretty nice from time to time. That's not the case here. Like these guys know each other enough that it wouldn't matter, I would think. Anyway, back to reality. Tsouloftas uses normal sizing, makes it 850K. Weis calls. I think we should ask if he should consider a 4-bet. I think it's pretty obvious that he shouldn't, but maybe you could argue otherwise.
I don't have any arguments for a 4-bet here. Like, we don't have any blockers. He can afford, like we're not threatening really anything with Tsouloftas' stack. He's got a lot more chips than us anyway. We have a hand that plays reasonably well as a call, doesn't play great as a 4-bet. I don't know. Yeah. And like, it also is the kind of hand where we want to see a flop with this hand, right? Like, this hand can flop super strong. And there are a lot of hands that can't. There are a lot of hands that mostly flop one pair, you know? And so, like, even when you flop top pair, like, that's all you flopped. But like this, it doesn't happen that often, but one out of every 7.5 times or so, we flop a total monster where we can get it all, you know? And against the guy who can be a little crazy, that has value too. A guy who might stack off against us, that's pretty good. But more to the point than that is not having blockers feels really important. Like if we had ace jack off here, I think that's a very interesting hand to consider 4-betting. I think that's pretty great.
It's hard to play out of position post flop and has good blockers.
Yeah. Like, so if we feel like this guy's 3-betting us too much, we should be 4-betting our ace jacks at least some of the time. But nines feels like almost never a 4-bet. I hate not having any good blockers with it. I hate being out of position. It just feels like we can do so much better than this for a 4-betting hand.
I agree. So Weis calls, pot's 2 million.
Okay.
Flop is ace of clubs, 6 of clubs, 3 of clubs. All clubs. Weis has the only club. Tsouloftas with ace deuce off has flopped top pair.
Yeah.
Weis checks. Not much you can do on this board other than check. We know Weis is capable of donking. This isn't one of those situations where he's going to do it. There's a lot of players that I will be against that I will check this hand back with as Tsouloftas, just to like turn it into a bluff catcher. I know there's a range advantage thing here. How do you go about choosing whether or not to bet this board with a hand like ace deuce off with no club?
I think there's real value in betting this hand in this spot because with the 3 clubs, with the 10 blind stack, and with the initiative, we just get to define the hand. First of all, we get to define the hand pretty quickly, which has some value. But second of all, we just get to, in a very cheap, we don't have to bet a lot, but we can very cheaply sort of start to charge clubs, which is useful to us. Like if Ali has a hand like he has, right? I don't love giving him a free card here. Like why not? I'd like to charge him. He's going to pay something for that, right? That seems good. Sometimes we are losing when we bet and get called, but then we get bailed out by a club also. Bailed out meaning not that we are now winning, but that we can now bluff that card, right? So it gives. I like taking the initiative here. 1, because we don't have to bet a lot. 2, if we check. I mean, I agree with you. There's some bluff catching possibilities here where Oliver might really start to lose his mind, and we've seen him do it, right? So there is value there. But there's so much value in this pretty big pot we've just created in just taking it down right now, I think, before mayhem ensues. And we have to start guessing in lots of ways for big chunks later. I'd rather have the advantage. Like we're in position. By betting now, we mostly get to keep that advantage, and then we can check back turn or not. Or bet turn and check back river or not. You know, like we get to decide almost how big the pot is much more of the time by betting now. Checking, we lose that ability a lot more of the time, I should say.
That's true. I would challenge some of the range stuff a little bit. Like this is clearly a range advantage board for Tsouloftas, but I don't think it's a super strong range advantage board. And I just want to ask you, like, what hands do you think Weis actually has here? Let's actually go through some hands that Weis has here.
Yeah. Okay, so Weis shouldn't have like low suited connectors or anything like that. I assume he's just folding those to our 3-bet.
I mean, if he has a flush, it's like 9-8 of clubs or better type flush.
Yeah, I don't even know if he has 9-8, but he certainly has like king queen of clubs, of course, and queen jack of clubs. I gotta believe, right? But there aren't very many flushes here. There's some suited cards and clubs, but not many. He definitely has like suited aces, like reasonable suited aces, like ace 10 suited, right? That is not, of course, clubs. Like ace 10 of diamonds is 100% a hand he can have here.
Yeah.
And makes a lot of sense. Medium pocket pairs. So it's like suited Broadway and reasonable pocket pairs. Is there anything else he can have?
I mean, he might have like maybe he has 9-8 of clubs, but like stuff like that is possible, or 9-8 of diamonds, whatever. Yeah, 10-9 maybe suited. Those types of hands.
Yeah,
but he doesn't really have any unsuited Broadway. Maybe he has king queen off. Maybe king queen off. That one's the only borderline one.
Probably not out of position, but maybe.
Yeah, and he could have hands like ace queen, unsuited and suited.
Yes, he can have both of those.
And he can have, like you said, ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, hands like that. I don't know what he does with ace jack off. He probably calls, but I'm not sure if he has that or not. He might just fold that or 4-bet that pre-flop like we were talking about.
I think he probably is 4-betting or folding, but I guess I've never played with Oliver, so what do I know?
Yeah. So ultimately, when we bet, unless Weis is going to get a little spooky, it is Halloween as we're recording this, by the way, and Jonathan's birthday. Congratulations on another year on the planet, sir. Like, it's not exactly a game theory disaster, but it's not an ideal spot, right? The types of hands he's calling with have reasonable equity like he has. We have this hand in bad shape, nines with the 9 of clubs, but it's not an easy spot to navigate continuously. He probably just folds his pocket pairs without a club that are below the ace, would be my guess. I don't think he's going to continue with those. Obviously, if he has a flush, he's going to continue. If he has any ace, it's going to be bigger than our ace, and he's going to call with that at least once.
Yep.
And he doesn't have any unsuited Broadway or unsuited cards that would be one club, really, unless it's a pair. So there aren't that many of those, right? There's 9s, there's 10s. I don't know when he starts the 4-betting. Jacks, queens, kings are all obviously reasonable 4-bets.
Yeah.
If he had the club with that. So maybe he has 4s, 5s, deuces with a club, but he might just fold those on the flop. I guess that's a good result.
I mean, folding those on the flop is a good result. Getting called by 2 black 9s is a good result too. Like charging those hands, getting called by, that's a worse hand that's putting money in where we've got more equity than it. That's pretty good. Rather than letting him see a free card and also losing control of the pot potentially with a hand that we can bluff catch a little, but we can't bluff catch a lot with, right? Like, are we going to go call on turn and river if he goes big? I don't know, man. Like, that's tough. We might do it. Weis is capable of bluffing there, but he certainly can have ace queen and just go bet, right? Like very easily.
Yeah, I mean,
or a flush or other stuff.
I think there's reasonable arguments for betting and checking because Weis's range, he's going to have a decent amount of continues based on the range we've outlined for him. He's going to have some suited Broadway that's an easy fold and some pairs without a club that are easy folds, and then he's going to call with all of his superior aces, call with all of his pairs with a club down to a certain point, and we're just going to have to try to figure out where he is among those hands, which is a little bit rough. And he's going to have some pretty strong hands in there, like the king high flush, obviously, and then ace queen with the queen of clubs. That's definitely a possibility. So I don't know. It's fine just to throw out a small bet and make things easier for ourselves. I think I ultimately agree with that. And that's what Tsouloftas does. He bets 425K.
Right. Yeah, I like it. Nice, really
Is there any raising for Weis here? Or is it just a pure call?
Raising sounds insane. Right.
Yeah.
Like a crazy person would raise right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be able to get 2 red queens to fold, and that would be a success, but there aren't very many hands that we are losing to that are going to bet fold here, I don't think, right? It's possible 2 red queens don't bet, by the way, on this flop.
It depends on how loosey-goosey Tsouloftas is getting. I mean, I think you're underestimating his loosey-goosiness. He just 3-bet ace deuce off. So
I mean, yeah. Ace deuce off and 2 red queens actually hand value wise are the same thing also, right? Except we block an ace with ace deuce off, so it's better. But like in terms of when Oliver Weis calls, we have the same value against that hand right now, right? Except we
basically
block the ace.
Basically.
I guess
if Tsouloftas has ace deuce, who knows he might be 3-betting a lot at this point. He might be really trying to do the step on the guy thing. And I don't think he's going to just check back with queen 9 suited when this flop comes, queen 9 of diamonds, hands like that, queen 8, whatever he has. So there are a lot of hands that he has that are just insta folds if we raise, I think.
I agree.
I'm not advocating for a raise, but I just wanted to push back on that a little bit. I think he does have a lot of insta-folds. But we have a hand that can more comfortably play as a call. Let's just put in, 3.5 blinds and hope it works out.
2.5 blinds. Oh, no, sorry, 120K. My bad.
Yeah.
My bad.
You're bad. So Weis calls. The pot is 2.85 million. The turn is the 7 of clubs.
Here we go.
And this is like, you get what you ask for, I guess, because it's, as Weis is like, okay, I guess I made a flush. Sweet. But like, also, this is scary and I don't like it. But it's good. But is it good? I don't know. That's the problem. Yeah.
Yep.
So you can't do anything but check. Like, leading is just ridiculous.
Crazy to lead now. My God, talk about game theory disaster.
Okay, and I think this is really interesting, and I hadn't thought of this until our previous discussion, but Tsouloftas now has such an incredible range advantage. Like, he has all of the king of clubs that Weis doesn't have, right? Weis just has suited king of clubs. He doesn't have the unsuited king of clubs.
I think so. I think that's right.
Because I don't think Weis has ace king. He's probably 4-betting that. We don't think he has king queen off pre.
Nope.
If he has the king of clubs by itself, is only king queen off, right? And maybe a tiny bit of king king, a tiny bit.
Maybe he can have a tiny bit of ace king off too. But these are such small amounts; they're basically irrelevant, right? Yeah.
Right. So like he's just got maybe king queen, king jack, and king 10 of clubs, and I'm not sure it goes that low, but it might. He might have those 3 combos as the nut flush. But Tsouloftas has any king of clubs that he decided to 3-bet, which could be a lot of hands. We were just talking about him maybe having queen 9 of diamonds. He could have king 10 off. And he could have who knows what. But it's such an incredible range advantage card for him because Weis doesn't really have pairs with a big club in them that often. He's usually got, if he's got a pair, something like 9s, like he has, maybe 10s, sometimes 5s or 4s. And those hands are in the turbines when we start betting. So ultimately, I do think Tsouloftas should turn this hand into a bluff, even though it feels game theory disastery, but at this point, this hand is such garbage that I think it's just time to bluff because Weis doesn't have that many super strong hands.
I mean, I don't necessarily think it's fully game theory disastery anyway. A hand like ace 10 suited, ace jack suited, that it won't have clubs then, right? Because the ace of clubs is on the board, probably just has to fold to a bet here. So we're going to get some better hands to fold anyway. And we get to, some just good things happen by betting here. Number one, we get some better hands to fold. Number two, we don't necessarily always define the hand as much as we might like. Not that we're always trying to define a hand, but we love defining our opponent's range as best we can to just make better decisions on the river, right? By betting small here, sometimes we get folds, which is great. Sometimes we get calls. But, even with the call, if it goes call and then he checks again, he often doesn't have the nuts. He sometimes will have the nuts, but he often doesn't. For the other reason, as you said, he doesn't really have the lone king of clubs anyway. So we should be able to get called here with a small bet by medium flushes and get them to at least strongly consider folding on the river. With a big bet, right? Like, that's a pretty sweet setup when our opponent basically can't have the king of clubs. That's a pretty good deal.
He can have the flop nuts, but he is often going to lead the river if he has the nuts because Tsouloftas is pretty much never betting the river without the nuts, you would think. Maybe with the queen high flush, Tsouloftas
for value. For value, right? Maybe
for value.
Probably the queen high, since we decided our man Ali can't have the king high flush anyway, basically. But I'll grant you, the queen high flush would be the max there, right?
Yeah.
So I like this idea of betting small on the turn. We can get called by lots of stuff that is better than our hand, but not strong enough to call big river bets that often anyway. And it sets up a lot of beautiful things when, even though, we can have the nuts, we don't, but Oliver almost never has the nuts here unless he has like king 10 of clubs and is slow playing it the whole way, which of course is possible, but rare.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tsouloftas goes small. He bets 900K into 2.85. So we love it. We think it's a good play. We're going to fold out a lot of hands, which is a great result. And we set up a play for the river that we kind of have to make unless weird things happen.
Yes.
That's the scary part. We kind of have to make the play when we bet this small. We kind of have to do it, right? Or else why would we bet this small?
Right.
Yeah.
This is a plan. This is part of the plan. Now, we might have the queen of clubs. So the thing is, it's king of clubs, maybe betting the queen of clubs on the turn. We might check back the queen of clubs, though, like you're saying, on the turn even, right? We really might.
Well, betting small kind of keeps our range a little wider. Maybe that helps us in that way as well.
Yeah, I guess so.
Anyway, Weis is kind of handcuffed into calling with the 9 of clubs in his hand. It would just be, it's too good of a hand to fold for 900K into 2.85 million. It doesn't threaten his stack. And Tsouloftas has to know this going in, that he's going to fold out the superior aces without a club, but he's not going to fold out the medium flushes with this bet. He has to know that.
No way.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. That's really fine.
So Weis calls. The pot is 4.65 million. The river is the 10 of diamonds. Board doesn't pair, so clubs are still the nuts. Weis checks again because what else are you going to do? Like, you're just hoping for check. Like, please give up, man. Please just give up. That would be great if you would just give up. Or just like turn over 8s with the 8 of clubs. That would be awesome too, if you could do that. Thanks
Hard
a lot
to believe,
if you do that.
But that would be great.
Yeah. Ace 8 with the 8 of clubs. I don't know, something like that. That would be awesome.
Like you made like a blocker bet on the turn, so that way to get you to a cheap showdown, right? Because if you check back, now you're gonna have a tough decision with the 8 of clubs on the river. Instead, you bet a third of the pot. You're quickly gonna check it back. That'd be great for us. Even if you have 2 10s with the 10 of clubs, great. Check it back now, right?
All right. So Weis checks, and we already established that when Tsouloftas chooses that size on the turn, he kind of has to go for it on the river with this setup and this range advantage.
Yeah.
So the question is sizing. There's 4.65 million in the pot. Weis has like enough that a shove would be weird almost. Like Weis has like 6 million. So
yeah.
So how do you want to size it?
I think I'm worried about going too big here. I'm worried that like, would we really go really big for value? I understand we can play the leveling war game and say, well, if we wouldn't, then we wouldn't. If we would, but like just trying to think about it really like Occam's razor here. There's a guy with 10 blinds. We're the 2 big stacks. We're the bigger stack of his. We're going to threaten his life to not fully, but we're going to really threaten like his health, not his life, but his health here.
We're gonna try to kneecap him. We're not gonna try to actually shoot him in the face.
Right, and like if we went for the shoot him in the face move, I don't know that it would be believable because like if Oliver almost never has the king of clubs, and both of us know that. Oliver knows that. Oliver knows we know that. Why would, if we had the king of clubs, we just couldn't bet that much, right? We bet small, trying to get called by weaker flushes. That's what we would do. So we should bet bigger than whatever we would probably bet with the king of clubs to bet small to get called by those things, but not so big that it's like, oh my God, like, you know, I don't want to terrify the 9 of clubs, you know. I think it just doesn't pass the smell test. So I think we should bet a reasonable amount, meaning like what's like on the bigger side of what we might reasonably bet if we had the king of clubs here.
60% of pot.
60%
of pot.
50? Yeah. That seems reasonable to me. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is very player dependent, right? Like against Weis, you have to tell a good story. But against a lot of players in these ICM pressure situations, you should go all in.
Right.
You should. Because they are like, oh, if I call 2.2 million, I'm still in with a shot for the biggest score of my life, you know? Whereas if you go all in, they're like, well, if I don't have the nuts, I'm folding. Like, absolutely.
They're going to fold the queen of clubs for sure if you go all in. And they're going to fold the queen of clubs saying like, I'm sure you're bluffing me. And they're going to show the queen of clubs and fold. And you're going to be like, of course I'm bluffing you. Right?
And by the way, one of the coolest, best feelings in poker, which I've experienced probably 6 or 7 times, is there's that annoying thing where people are like contemplating on the river calling and they're like, I know I have you. And then they fold. And like where you're bluffing. And like, so I've done this a few times where they still have their cards. They haven't mucked yet. And I say, well, you know, there is a way to prove that you know you have me. You can actually call. And if you have me, you get the chips. And I've said that when I'm bluffing and it feels so good because they fold anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I was also at a tournament where I had been 3-betting a lot, and the guy says like, wow, you sure play a lot of hands. Like you sure 3-bet every time that I open them. And I say like, well, you know, there is a way to fight against that. Like I just tell them the strategy and it doesn't matter. They don't change, right? Because they don't want to fight back. And Weis is not that guy. So you have to change your plans against a guy like Weis. And I like your idea of sizing. Tsouloftas goes a little smaller even than like the maximum. He goes 2.2 into 4.65, which is still at this point of the tournament a significant bet, right? Represents a significant portion of the chips in the tournament.
It's telling a really good story. It looks very believable. It looks like he has the king of clubs a lot here, and he's trying to get called by the jack of clubs, right, when he bets like that.
And he could even have the queen of clubs sometimes with this sizing. Like, you know, Going a little thin.
A thin, but at the same point, he's like, I mean, you don't ever have the king of clubs, right? We've established this. We all know you can't really have the king of clubs. There's like, especially when I have the queen of clubs in my hand, you have 2 combos of the king of clubs, and you flopped it, and we'll find out in a second because you'll move in. Like, so be it. Like, but every other time, I agree. He can have the queen of clubs here too.
Yeah. So that sucks for Weis. This is a pretty good setup for Tsouloftas and a well-played hand by Tsouloftas. I think he's done a great job with this, no matter what the result is here.
Agreed.
Weis goes deep into the tank. How do you make this decision as Weis?
I mean, I think we always have to come back to distribution, right? Like that's what we should do here. So where does this fall in our group of hands? Mm-hmm. I mean, the answer is not that high up, right? Like we have...
I don't know if I agree.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
If we have king, queen off, then I think this is an easy fold because then we have enough nut flushes and second nut flushes that we can make those calls easily and raises, right? But if we don't have king, queen off, then we have the 3 combos of king X suited. We think he has down to king 10 of clubs. We're just guessing.
Let's say he does. I think that's reasonable.
He has, 10s with a 10 of clubs, 9s with a 9 of clubs. I guess he could have jacks with a jack of clubs, but that might be a 4-bet.
Let's give him some jacks.
Okay. So then we end up pretty high in our distribution based on that because...
Well, what else does he have, though? So right now, that's nines is still the worst hand in that group of things you just said, right?
Yeah, because he has flop sets that he could call on the turn as well. And
what
he's
was the flop? It was
A6-3.
Okay, I don't know. But I don't know if he has 3s and 6s or not.
I mean, he absolutely should have 3s and 6s based on the stack depth pre-flop.
Yeah, you're probably right. Okay.
So he's got the flop sets. He's probably got 8s with the 8 of clubs, 7s with the 7 of clubs. I don't know if he goes down to 5s with the 5 of clubs and 4s with the 4 of clubs and deuces with the deuce of clubs. I don't know if he does or not. So maybe it's based on that whether or not this is a call. I'm not really sure. It's also the question of like, what is Tsouloftas capable of? Is he going to have all hands here? Like, is he literally going to have all hands? Because I think he has all hands. Like, he doesn't have any blockers that mean anything with ace deuce off. And he's obviously 3-betting wide. So if he has all hands, which we might not know that as Weis, right?
Yeah. I mean, when we call the turn, like we already know as Oliver Weis, we should know more or less what we're doing with 9s to river bets. Now, of course, it's going to depend on the size of the river bet, of course, and that's going to have to recalibrate there. But we should have a general plan already for these 9s before we put in the call on the turn. We're Oliver Weis, right? Like we should know, we should have a sense of it. Now, I would guess that based on the size, 9s is now going to be really close in either direction, and that's why he takes forever and tanks. But that like two 7s with the 7 of clubs is not close, is an easier decision because that's going to be further down. And 2 jacks with jack clubs is going to probably be, he's going to think about it, I'm sure, but it's probably going to be a call because he's like, how many better hands do I really have here? Like, there's so few better hands. I'm going to have to call. So I don't know, man. I mean, it like you said, it comes down to how many of those other clubs does he have? Some of the sets that he has, he's going to fast play on the flop. He's not always just going to check call a set on the flop. So we can remove some of those, but not all of them, right? He's also going to, some of the combos of king X of clubs, he's going to raise on the flop. Not too many, but probably a few. So that way he can have some balance to his game, at least some, a little bit. He wants to be able to have the nuts a little bit when he check raises there, right? If he has any raises at all.
In the distribution discussion, I kind of forgot hands like queen jack of clubs and jack 10 of clubs, which he's going to have as well, that are superior to this hand.
Yes. Okay. Those are better too, for sure. So there's the flop straights, the flop flushes that are now 1-card flushes, but are good, better anyway, right? But there still aren't that many of those. There's only a few. Having said that, but there's a few extra. It's a tough one, and like you said, the more we believe Tsouloftas is doing this with like a lot of his range or all of his range, the more we have to start to throw 9s back in the bucket of call, because otherwise we're just folding way too much, right? If his range is massively wide, we can't have our calling range be massively small. That's crazy, right? We're just giving it away here.
I don't really know if Weis is like pure game theory guy or what. It's possible because he's an online guy.
Yeah.
But if he's not a pure game theory guy, it's possible that Tsouloftas has told a good story that makes him kind of tighten his calling range here with Tsouloftas' sizing being just like pretty impeccably good. Like a very, very good job with the sizing on Tsouloftas. So if Weis is taking that into account and like really believing the story, maybe he cuts off a chunk of the lower end of the distribution that he would normally call with online, you know?
Yeah.
Who knows?
That's pretty good. Like if Tsouloftas went bigger, and it was I was saying I didn't think that would pass the smell test very much, where it's so hard for us to have the nuts, and we both know it. Then it's going to be an easier call with 2 9s, with the black 9, the 9 of clubs, because he just shouldn't have it nearly as much. Yeah. He's going for more fold equity.
So ultimately, Weis folds.
Yeah.
And I give a lot of credit to Tsouloftas in this hand. I think he played it really well. I think he made really good sizing decisions on the turn and river in particular. And it's the second hand in a row between these guys that I think Tsouloftas made the theoretically correct decision on the river that was hard to see before doing a deep analysis of it. Like we figured out that aces with the ace of spades was a great call on the river in the last podcast. Yes. And I think this is a really good play with his random hand on the river with the right sizing. So I think he's doing a great job playing against this really scary player. So it's pretty impressive.
I also really love the idea of betting the 2.2 on the river.
Yeah.
Because once in a while, we're going to run right into it, right? Like once in a while, we're going to get raised or insta-called because our man is going to have king X of clubs or ace queen with the queen of clubs. And it's just going to call, like even ace queen may take 25 seconds, but it's going to call very quickly.
It's definitely calling. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, so we get to save our money from going for more fold equity against the hands like the 9 of clubs.
Yeah.
And 9 of clubs still is going to ultimately fold. At least in this case, we see it did, and is probably usually going to fold, right? All those other clubs are going to fold also. So we lose less when we're losing to a hand that isn't going to give up. And we still get the fold equity against pretty much all the hands we want to have fold equity against. It's kind of a beautiful, like middling move there where you hit it, you sort of get everything you want. Yes, between the raindrops kind of a thing.
It works. Good job by Tsouloftas. Unfortunately for him, it doesn't change the result that we told you last week. He still ends up second in the tournament to Weis, who gets first. Still second. Great result.
Pretty good.
Both these guys are, I think Tsouloftas is a pretty good player.
Yeah.
You know, Weis has the resume, but I like what Tsouloftas is doing here. It's pretty good. Yeah. So good for them. They played well. I like to see it.
Music is my sunlight, and all I need is one mic, and I can show every single MC how it's done right. Every time I come by, I'm bound to leave them tongue-tied. I'm sipping on liquor, a quitter is what I'm not. We got one life, and I took a minor break, but I'm back to claim the throne. And gonna be traveling the globe, and still have time to make it home. And you gonna meet